The Vethkari Apex Academy had never locked its dormitory doors before. Not once in 163 years of operation. The academy existed to train the galaxy's apex predator species, the beings who sat at the top of their respective food chains, the organisms that other species had nightmares about, the kind of students who, on their home worlds, were the things that went bump in the night. You did not lock doors at the Apex Academy. You were the reason other people locked doors. That was the entire point. And then, on a Tuesday in the 44th year of the Galactic Cooperative Era, due to an administrative error in the cross-institutional exchange program that everyone would later agree was entirely the fault of the intake coordinator's filing system and absolutely nobody's deliberate decision, a human arrived. By the end of the first week, 3 of the galaxy's most feared predator species had independently decided to start locking their dormitory doors at night. By the end of the second week, the Academy's senior staff had convened an emergency faculty meeting. Not about the human. About why their apex predator students were afraid of her. The Vethkari Apex Academy accepted students from 7 species. All 7 shared certain characteristics. They were, on their home worlds, unambiguously at the top of their respective ecological hierarchies. They had evolved as hunters, not opportunistic hunters, not omnivorous generalists who occasionally caught prey, but dedicated, specialized, apex predators whose entire biological architecture was oriented around finding, pursuing, and ending other organisms. They were, in the galactic taxonomy of dangerous things, the highest classification available. The application process was correspondingly selective. Candidates were evaluated not just on academic merit but on predatory profile, territorial range, hunting success rate, kill efficiency metrics that the Academy's admissions committee reviewed with the particular enthusiasm of specialists evaluating the finest examples of their field. The Cross-Institutional Exchange Program, a recent addition, designed to broaden students' exposure to interstellar military and tactical traditions, involved the Academy sending 2 students per year to partner institutions and receiving 2 students in return. Partner institution number 7 on the exchange list was the Galactic Combined Forces Academy. The Combined Forces Academy's exchange coordinator, a Velhari administrator named Prethvon who managed 14 different exchange programs simultaneously and who would later describe the incident as a data entry situation that I take full responsibility for and that will absolutely not happen again, had submitted the exchange application. For Cadet First Class Yara Chen. Cadet Chen was, by Combined Forces Academy metrics, an exceptional candidate for exchange placement. Top 3% of her cohort. Outstanding tactical assessment scores. Remarkable environmental adaptation rating. What Prethvon had failed to notice, because he was managing 14 programs and the field was small and the font on the species classification was genuinely very small, was that the Vethkari Apex Academy's exchange program specified predator class species only. Cadet Chen was human. Humans were classified in the Galactic Species Registry as omnivore. Persistence hunter subclassification. Deathworld origin. Not predator class. The form went through. The Academy's intake system processed it. Nobody caught it until Cadet Yara Chen stepped off the shuttle at Vethkari Station and the intake coordinator, a Morkai named Shaithron whose species had 17 distinct physiological threat assessment responses, experienced all 17 of them simultaneously in the wrong direction. Wrong direction meaning, none of them activated. Looking at the small human female with the duffel bag and the slightly confused expression, Shaithron's threat assessment system reported clearly and unambiguously, not a predator, which was a problem. Because this was supposed to be a predator. Shaithron's dilemma. Shaithron had been the Academy's intake coordinator for 11 years. In 11 years, every student who had come off that shuttle had activated at least some of his threat assessment responses. The Kethvoran students, big, plated, with the particular patient stillness of ambush hunters, triggered his territorial response. The Morkai students, his own species, triggered his competitive hierarchy response. The Vreth students, who were small but moved in the specific way of things that had evolved to be faster than everything that wanted to eat them, triggered his pursuit prey identification response, inverted because they moved like hunters but at a scale that his nervous system found unsettling in a different way. The human triggered nothing. She looked at the station with what his system classified as curiosity, not threat assessment, not territorial mapping, just apparently genuine interest in her surroundings. And then she looked at him and smiled. Shaithron had 17 threat assessment responses. He did not have a response for being smiled at by something his system had. classified as non-threatening, that was standing in the intake bay of the galaxy's most prestigious predator academy. "Cadet Chen?" he said. "That's me," she said. "Sorry, is this the right shuttle bay? The signage system uses a glyph set I don't have in my translator yet." "It is," he said. "You are the exchange student from the Combined Forces Academy." "Yes." She looked around again. "This place is impressive. The architecture there's a lot of vertical space. Is that typical for the species that attend here?" Shaithran looked at the intake bay, which he had processed students through 11 times a year for 11 years and had never consciously noticed the vertical space. "Several attending species are arboreal hunters," he said, on autopilot. "The architecture is adapted." "Interesting." She was looking at the ceiling. "Do they maintain the hunting behaviors in an institutional environment?" "I'd love to talk to someone about the adaptation." "Cadet Chen," Shaithran said. She looked at him. "Are you aware of the nature of this institution?" She looked at her intake paperwork. "Vethkari Apex Academy, specializing in tactical and strategic training for O." She paused. She read the full species classification list. She read it again. "These are all apex predator species." "Yes. And I'm human, yes." A pause. "That seems like a filing error," she said. "I believe so, yes." She considered this for a moment. Then, "Well, I'm here now." She picked up her duffel bag. "Where's my dormitory?" The faculty meeting, Day 1. Headmaster Vrethkon had run the Vethkari Apex Academy for 22 years. He had navigated institutional crises before, territorial disputes between student species, incidents in the tactical training halls that the Academy's insurance documentation classified, with careful understatement, as equipment damage events. One memorable year in which 3 different students from 3 different species had simultaneously decided they were the dominant organism in the facility and had needed to be separately convinced, through different means appropriate to each species' psychology, that the hierarchy question could be resolved non-fatally. He had never had a human. He convened the emergency faculty meeting on Day 1, before Cadet Chen had even reached her dormitory. The faculty of the Vethkari Apex Academy represented 6 species, 1 from each of the student populations, plus Vrethkon himself. They were, collectively, some of the most physically formidable beings in the known galaxy. They sat around the faculty table and looked at Cadet Chen's intake file. "She's human," said Professor Scothor, who taught pursuit tactics and whose species had a bite force that structural engineers used as a reference benchmark. "Humans are not apex predators." "Technically," said Professor Lethvaz, who taught ambush methodology and whose species had spent 60 million years evolving perfect camouflage, "they are classified as persistence hunters, subapex, Deathworld origin, which does complicate the standard classification." "She's not a predator," Scothor said. He looked at the file. "She's a cadet from a multi-species military academy. She studies tactics. She's not a hunter. She's human," Professor Lethvaz said again, more quietly. Scothor looked at him. "You're not suggesting—" "I'm suggesting," Lethvaz said, "that the Deathworld classification exists for a reason, and that perhaps we should review exactly what it means before we decide this is simply an administrative inconvenience." A pause around the table. Vrethkon looked at the file, at the species classification, at the subclassification notes that the Galactic Registry appended to the human entry, which were longer than most species' full entries, and which ended with a phrase that the registry's editorial committee had apparently decided was both accurate and necessary. Note: standard predator classification metrics are insufficient for this species. See supplementary documentation. Send for the supplementary documentation, Vrethkon said. He also, quietly, sent a message to the Combined Forces Academy asking for Cadet Chen's full assessment file. He read both documents that evening. He slept poorly. What the students made of her. The student body of the Vethkari Apex Academy numbered 43. They were, as a group, not easily impressed. They had been selected from the top of their respective species hierarchies. They had grown up as the things that other things were afraid of. They had arrived at the academy already understanding, at a bone-deep level, their place in the ecological order of things. They looked at the human who had appeared in their dining hall on day 2 with her food tray and her slightly too large academy uniform and her expression of calm, alert interest, and they assessed her. The assessment was initially unanimous, not a threat. Not in the way that non-threats usually registered, with the mild irrelevance of something that simply didn't matter. More in the way that something unfamiliar registered when your threat assessment system genuinely didn't know what to do with it. Her physiological profile was wrong for this environment. Too small. No obvious offensive biological weapons, no natural armor, no venom delivery system, no enhanced sensory apparatus that screamed hunter. She moved well, efficiently, with a spatial awareness that several students noted independently, but not in the pattern of an apex predator. Something different. She sat down at a table in the dining hall. Every student in the room was aware of exactly where she was. None of them could explain why. A Kethvoran student named Vraxith, who on his home world had a territorial range of 400 kilometers and whose threat assessment system was so well developed that he could identify the species and stress level of any organism within 30 meters by scent alone, sat 3 tables away and found himself doing something he had never done in 20 years of life. Watching her. Not assessing her as prey. Not assessing her as competition. Just watching. With the particular attention you gave to something that your system had flagged as significant without being able to specify why. She ate her meal. She read something on her data pad. She looked up occasionally and noted, with what appeared to be completely genuine interest, the various species sharing the dining space with her. At one point she caught Vraxith watching her. She smiled at him. He looked away. Later, in his private notes, which the Academy's counseling staff would eventually review with great interest, he wrote, "The human made eye contact with me in the dining hall. I looked away. I am attempting to determine why I looked away. My working hypothesis is that forward-facing eyes on a small organism that should not have forward-facing eyes produce a threat classification conflict in my assessment system that my system resolves by defaulting to caution. This is irritating." The first training session. The Academy's first-year training sessions were divided by species for the initial weeks. This was standard practice, allowing students to establish baseline performance metrics before cross-species comparative training began. The human presented a scheduling problem. There was no human cohort. There was one human. Vrethcon solved this by assigning her to observe all first-year sessions in the first week, which would serve as her orientation and give the faculty time to develop an appropriate individual curriculum. This meant Cadet Chen spent the first week watching Vraxitha's cohort run pursuit training, the Kethvoran students moving through a simulated environment at speeds that made the air pressure change noticeably, covering ground with the ground-eating efficiency of organisms that had evolved to run prey into exhaustion. She watched with her data pad. She took notes. Watching Lethvaz's Vreth cohort run ambush simulations, the students disappearing into environments that offered almost no obvious concealment, remaining motionless for periods that other species would have found physically impossible, then moving with a speed and precision that made the transition from stillness to full action seem like a physical law being broken. She watched. She took notes. Watching the Morkai cohort's territorial assessment exercises, complex, multi-stage evaluations of environmental control that involved mapping, marking, and defending a defined space against simulated intrusion with a sophistication that reflected 60 million years of territorial evolution. She watched. She took a lot of notes. Professor Scothor, supervising the pursuit training session, noticed her in the observation gallery and found himself doing something he did not usually do during student training. He watched her watching his students. After the session, he approached her. "You've been taking notes," he said. "Yes, Professor." She showed him the data pad. Movement efficiency analysis for the Kethvoran pursuit pattern. The stride interval at top speed is interesting. There's a slight asymmetry in the left rear limb loading that's probably not affecting current performance but might become a factor under extended duration pursuit conditions. You might want to check that. Scothor looked at the data pad. Then at his student, Vraxith, who was on the other side of the training hall and who could not possibly have heard the conversation but who had, Scothor noticed, oriented his body toward the observation gallery with the particular attentiveness of something whose system had flagged a nearby stimulus as worth tracking. "You have a background in biomechanics?" Scothor asked. "Basic level, enough for field assessment. I did 3 years with the Earth Rapid Response Corps." You learn to read movement patterns. She looked at the training hall. Your students are extraordinary, Professor. The Kethvorn pursuit efficiency is... I've read about it, but watching it is something else entirely. You've read about it. I did a lot of reading before I came. Once I realized where I'd been placed, I wanted to understand the environment. He looked at her. You read about apex predator species, he said, because you'd been accidentally enrolled in an apex predator academy. Yes. And your response to discovering that was to research. What else would you do? He didn't have an immediate answer. That evening, he added a note to the faculty meeting agenda. The human is studying us. It read, I recommend we pay attention to what she learns. The door situation, the dormitory door locking began on day 9. It started with a Morkai student named Kethsar, who had the dormitory room adjacent to Cadet Chen's and who had, on the evening of day 8, woken at 0300 to find that the human had apparently gone for a walk. This was not, in itself, unusual. What was unusual was that Kethsar, whose species had evolved as nocturnal hunters with sensory systems specifically tuned for detecting movement in darkness, had not heard her leave. He had not heard her in the corridor. He had not heard her return. 40 minutes later, until she was already back in her room, he lay in the dark of his dormitory and processed this information. His species moved silently. It was one of their defining characteristics, the particular predatory silence of an organism that had evolved to approach prey without warning. He had not heard the human. He checked his sensory systems. They were functioning normally. He could hear, with complete clarity, the breathing patterns of 6 other students in the surrounding rooms, the ventilation cycling, the faint structural settling of the building's outer hull. He had not heard the human. He got up. He examined his door. He looked at the simple slide mechanism that held it closed. Then, for the first time in his life, in a building full of apex predators where the concept of locking a door had literally never occurred to anyone, he engaged the manual lock. He didn't tell anyone. 3 days later, 2 other students had independently done the same thing. None of them discussed it with each other. None of them discussed it with faculty. It was the Academy's counseling staff member, a Velhari named Prethsan, who had the particular professional skill of noticing things people weren't saying, who brought it to Vrethkon's attention. 3 students are locking their dormitory doors, she said. Vrethkon looked up from his desk. That's never happened before. No. Which students? She told him. He looked at the list. At 3 species that were, collectively, among the most formidable organisms in the student body. What's the common factor? Their rooms are adjacent to or near the human's dormitory. A pause. They're locking their doors, Vrethkon said. Because of the human. That appears to be the case. Why? Prethsan sat down. I've spoken with each of them informally. Without pressing, they're not forthcoming about it, which is itself interesting, because these are not species that typically have difficulty articulating threat assessments. She paused. What I've gathered is that it's not that they feel directly threatened by her. It's something more specific than that. What? They're not sure what she is, Prethsan said. Their assessment systems can't fully classify her. She doesn't fit the predator template, wrong size, wrong movement pattern, wrong sensory profile. But she also doesn't fit the prey template, and that's the part that's creating the problem. Why is that a problem? Because their systems default to caution when they can't classify something, she said. It's a survival mechanism. If you can't tell what something is, you treat it as potentially dangerous until you can. And they can't classify her. So they're treating her as potentially dangerous. She's human, Vrethkon said. Yes, Prethsan said. And what exactly does that mean? He didn't answer, because he'd read the supplementary documentation, and he was beginning to think he understood why his apex predator students couldn't classify her. She wasn't prey. She wasn't a predator. She was something the classification system hadn't been built to handle. What she was doing at night. Cadet Chen, when asked directly by Headmaster Vrethkon why she had been moving through the dormitory corridors at 0300, gave an answer that was entirely straightforward. I was mapping the facility, she said. Mapping it. The layout, the sight lines, the acoustic properties of the corridors, they're different at night when there's less activity. The ventilation pattern changes. 2. I like to understand the spaces I'm operating in. You map facilities in the middle of the night. I map them whenever I have time. Night is when I'm not in sessions, so that's when I do it. She paused. Is that a problem? I wasn't accessing any restricted areas. Vrethkon looked at her. You were moving silently enough that a Morkai student with full nocturnal sensory capacity didn't hear you. She looked mildly surprised. I wasn't trying to be silent particularly. I just move carefully in unfamiliar spaces. You don't know what the floor surface is going to do. You don't know if there are pressure sensors. You move carefully until you have the information. She paused. Earth habit. Dense environments. You learn to move without disturbing things. Earth habit, he repeated. Jungles, mostly. Urban environments too. São Paulo has a lot of complex acoustic spaces. You learn. She looked at him. Did I disturb someone? Several someones, he said. Though disturb is perhaps not the right word. She waited. 3 students have started locking their dormitory doors, he said. The rooms adjacent to yours. A pause. Then, with what appeared to be genuine surprise, because of me? That appears to be the case. She sat with that for a moment. Then, slowly, she started to smile. Not unkindly, there was nothing mean in it. Something more like someone who had just understood a joke. They can't classify me, she said. That he looked at her. They're assessment systems. I'm not registering as prey. I don't have the profile. But I'm not registering as a predator either. Wrong everything. So their system defaults to caution. She paused. And the night movement. They heard me moving without hearing me moving. That made it worse. You understand their systems. I read about them, she said simply. Before I came. She was quiet for a moment. Should I make more noise at night? I can do that. That's... Vrethkon stopped. Started again. That's not the primary concern. What is? He looked at her. At a 21-year-old human who had been accidentally enrolled in an institution full of apex predators, had spent her first week studying them systematically, was spending her nights mapping the facility, and had somehow managed to make 3 of the galaxy's most formidable organisms lock their doors without doing anything overtly threatening. I'm not sure yet, he said honestly. The faculty meeting, week 3. By week 3, the faculty meeting had stopped being about whether to send Cadet Chen back to the Combined Forces Academy and had become, without anyone quite deciding this, about something else. She corrected Vrak Sitha's pursuit form, Professor Scothor said. The left rear limb asymmetry she identified in week 1. She approached him after the session yesterday, showed him her analysis, and suggested a compensatory adjustment. He's been working on it. His endurance metrics over extended pursuit have improved by 7% in 3 days. A pause around the table. She corrected a Kethvorn student's pursuit form, said Professor Lethvaz. A species that has been evolving pursuit mechanics for 60 million years. The adjustment she suggested was biomechanically sound, Scothor said. I checked it. It's correct. Another pause. She's been attending my ambush sessions informally, Lethvaz said. Not scheduled. She asked permission in week 2 and I said yes because I didn't see the harm. She sits in the observation gallery and watches. He paused. On day 15 she asked if she could participate in a session. I said yes, again without thinking about it carefully. What happened? She completed the basic concealment assessment, Lethvaz said. First attempt. With a score that would have been acceptable for a second-year Vreth student. Silence. She's not Vreth, someone said. She doesn't have the biological equipment. How? She's from Earth, Lethvaz said. Earth has... I went and read the documentation after the session. Earth has a biome called rainforest. Dense canopy cover, complex layered vegetation, visual range often measured in meters. The organisms that survived in that environment had to develop spatial awareness and concealment skills that... He stopped. The biological equipment is different. The underlying skill set is comparable. More silence. She's been asking Kethzar about territorial mapping, the Morkai faculty member said. He came to me about it. He wasn't sure whether to engage. I told him to use his judgment. And... He's been teaching her, the faculty member said, for the past 4 days, voluntarily. A pause. Kethzar, who locked his door because of her, is now voluntarily spending his recreational time teaching her territorial assessment methodology. Vrethkon looked around the table. At his faculty, 6 species, all apex predators, all looking at the same set of facts and arriving at the same place he was arriving. She came here as a mistake, he said. Yes, said Professor Scathor. And in 3 weeks. She's corrected a Kethvoran's pursuit form, Scathor said, passed a Vreth ambush assessment, and is being voluntarily tutored in Morkai territorial methodology by the student who was most unsettled by her. What is she? Someone asked. The question sat in the room. Vrethkon thought about the supplementary documentation he'd read on day 1. About the classification problem that human species presented to standard galactic taxonomy. Not predator. Not prey. Something else. Something the classification system hadn't been built to handle. She's a student, he said finally, and I think we should treat her like one. The conversation. He found her in the Academy's library, a space that most students used minimally, preferring the practical training halls, but that Cadet Chen had apparently discovered in week 1 and visited daily. She was reading, not her datapad, an actual physical document, the Academy's historical records, bound in material that Vrethkon recognized as Morkai traditional archival hide. The history of the Academy, he said. The faculty member histories are fascinating, she said, setting the document down. The methodological evolution from Generation 1 to the current curriculum is significant. You've moved substantially away from the species-specific approach toward integrated cross-species tactics. When did that shift happen? 60 years ago, he said. My predecessor's initiative. He believed apex predators who only understood their own methodology were less effective than those who understood multiple approaches. He was right, Chen said. The most dangerous hunters on Earth were the generalists, the ones who could use multiple strategies depending on context. She paused. Can I ask you something, Headmaster? Yes. Am I staying? He looked at her, at the historical records in her lap, at 3 weeks of data that had consistently surprised everyone in the building. That depends, he said. Do you want to stay? She thought about it seriously. I came here by mistake. I know that. But she looked at the training hall visible through the library window, where several students were running a cross-species cooperative exercise that hadn't been on the original session plan. I'm learning things here that I couldn't learn anywhere else. The methodology, the perspective. She paused. And I think maybe I'm being useful. Vraxitha's pursuit metrics have improved 7%, Vrethkon said. She smiled. I noticed. Kethzar unlocked his door 3 days ago. The smile widened slightly. I noticed that too. You notice a great deal. Earth habit, she said. You pay attention or you don't survive. He was quiet for a moment. What are you? He asked. Not unkindly. The same question the faculty had asked, but asked differently, with genuine curiosity rather than taxonomic frustration. She considered it. Human, she said, which means Deathworld origin, persistence hunter lineage. Generalist by nature, we can do a lot of things reasonably well rather than one thing perfectly. We observe, we adapt, we learn. She paused. We're not the fastest thing in the ecosystem, not the strongest, not the most naturally armored or the most venomous or the most. She gestured at the training hall. We're not any of those things. But we've been paying attention for a very long time, she said. To everything. To every apex predator on our planet, and there were a lot of them. We watched how they moved, how they hunted, what worked, what didn't. She looked at him. And then we learned it. Silence. You're not afraid of my students, he said. No. They've been afraid of you. I know. I'm sorry about that. I wasn't trying to. Don't apologize, he said. It's useful data. He paused. They're not afraid of you because you're dangerous in the conventional sense. They're afraid of you because they can't classify you. And things they can't classify, their systems treat as potentially dangerous. Because potentially dangerous is safer to assume than not dangerous, she said. Survival heuristic. Yes. Their systems are right, she said quietly. He looked at her. Not because I'm going to do anything threatening, she said, but because a thing you can't classify is a thing you don't have a complete model of. And a thing you don't have a complete model of can surprise you. And surprises in predator ecology are expensive. She paused. They're right to treat unclassifiable things with caution. Their instincts are correct. It's just, she smiled slightly. I'm not what the instinct is designed for. What are you designed for? He asked. She looked at the training hall. At the Kethvoran students running pursuit patterns. The Vreth students doing concealment drills. The Morkai students mapping the territorial exercise grid. Learning, she said simply. That's what we're for. That's all we've ever been for. She paused. And teaching, sometimes, when we have something worth sharing. Month 3. By the end of month 3, the Vethkari Apex Academy had quietly, without any formal announcement or policy change, become a slightly different institution than it had been before Cadet Chen arrived. Not dramatically different. The curriculum was the same. The training methodology was the same. The species that attended were the same. But things had shifted. The cross-species training sessions, which had previously been a minor component of the curriculum, added as an afterthought to the primarily species-specific program, had expanded. Not because anyone had decided to expand them, but because students kept requesting them. Because Vraxith had discovered that his pursuit methodology improved when he understood Vreth ambush patterns. Because the Morkai students had found that territorial mapping principles applied to cooperative exercises in ways their species-specific training hadn't fully developed. Because a human had spent 3 months watching all of them, taking notes, and asking questions that turned out to be very good questions. Professor Scothor had formalized the biomechanical analysis protocol that Chun had developed informally. It was now part of the pursuit training curriculum, applied to all students. It had improved average pursuit endurance metrics across the Kethvoran cohort by an average of 11%. Professor Lethvaz had added an observation component to the ambush training program, structured, systematic observation of the exercises, followed by peer analysis. He had based it, without stating this publicly, on what he had watched Chin do in the observation gallery for 8 weeks. Kethzar had unlocked his door permanently on day 16. He had also, in a development that the Academy's counseling staff found professionally fascinating, started sitting near Chun in the dining hall. Not with her, exactly, the social dynamics of Morkai territorial eating behavior made shared meals complex. But near, in the adjacent territorial zone, which, for a Morkai, was the equivalent of an invitation. The last session. The exchange program was 3 months. On the last day, Vrethkon convened the full student body in the Academy's main hall. This was not standard practice for exchange student departures. The standard practice was a brief administrative acknowledgement and a transport booking. He convened the full student body because, in 22 years of running this institution, he had never had a departure that felt like it warranted more than the standard. This one did. Cadet Chun stood at the front of the hall looking, as she had looked on day 1, slightly too small for the Academy's vertical architecture and entirely unbothered by it. In 3 months, Vrethkon said, addressing the assembled students, this institution has received something it did not expect. Not because we requested it, we didn't. Not because we planned for it, we didn't. But because an administrative error placed a human in the middle of 43 apex predators and asked everyone, implicitly, to figure out what to do with that. He looked at his students. What happened instead was this. 43 apex predators started paying attention to something they couldn't classify. And that attention, the kind of attention your instincts produce when they encounter the genuinely unfamiliar, turned out to be valuable. Not because the human was threatening, but because the unclassifiable thing made you look harder. Think differently. Ask questions you hadn't thought to ask. He looked at Chun. And the human, he said, did what humans apparently do. She paid attention to all of you. She learned your methodologies. She found the improvement points that your own training had missed because you'd been looking at yourselves too long to see them clearly. He paused. She made Vraxith faster. She made Lethvaz's students think about their concealment differently. She made Kethzar, who locked his door because of her, decide to unlock it and teach her instead. Silence in the hall. The Vethkari Apex Academy exists, Vrethkon said, to produce the finest hunters, tacticians, and operators in the known galaxy. We do this by training apex predators to be the best version of what they already are. He paused. This term, for the first time, we had something different. Something that wasn't an apex predator in the conventional sense. And it turned out, to our benefit, that the best version of what we are benefits from understanding things that aren't like us. He looked at Chen. Cadet Chen, he said. The faculty of the Vethkari Apex Academy has voted unanimously to recommend your continued participation in the exchange program. If the Combined Forces Academy agrees, and if you're willing, we would like you to return next term. A pause. 43 apex predators looked at the human. The human looked at 43 apex predators. Then Vraxith Kethvorin, 400-kilometer territorial range, pursuit hunter of extraordinary capability, made a sound that his species used in precisely one context. Acknowledgement of a peer. One by one, around the hall, other students followed. Chun stood in the middle of it, and the expression on her face was the same one she'd worn since day one. Alert, curious, engaged, taking notes on everything. The message Vrethkon sent to the Combined Forces Academy, formally requesting the extension of Cadet Chen's exchange placement, included a cover note that the Combined Forces Academy's admissions office printed out and pinned to their notice board, where it remained for 7 years. It read, "To the Combined Forces Academy Admissions Office. You sent us a human by mistake. We are requesting you send her back on purpose. In 3 months, she has improved pursuit endurance metrics across our Kethvorin cohort by an average of 11%. She has introduced an observation methodology that has been formally incorporated into our ambush training curriculum. She has established peer relationships across 5 species that have produced measurable improvements in cross-species cooperative exercise outcomes. She did this by doing what we are told humans do. She paid attention. She learned. She found the useful thing in every situation she encountered, including, notably, the situation of being accidentally placed in an institution full of apex predators who didn't know what to do with her. 3 of our students locked their dormitory doors because of her. All 3 of them have since unlocked them. One of them is teaching her territorial mapping. We have been running this institution for 163 years. In that time, we have trained some of the finest predators in the known galaxy. We have never had a human. We should have. Please advise on availability for next term. Headmaster Vrethkon. Vethkari Apex Academy. P.S. We are also requesting that your intake coordinator review the species classification field on exchange application forms. We understand the font is small. We are told this is not an excuse. We agree. It was, however, the best mistake this institution has ever made. They put a human in the Predator Academy by mistake. The predators started locking their doors. And then, one of them unlocked his door and taught her territorial mapping. And another let her correct his pursuit form. And another gave her the highest acknowledgement his species could give. Because the human did what humans always do. She paid attention. She learned. She found the useful thing in every situation, including the situation of being the smallest, least armored, most misclassified being in a building full of apex predators. They couldn't classify her. Their instincts told them to be cautious. Their instincts were right. Not because she was dangerous in the way they expected danger to look. Because she was dangerous in the way Earth made everything dangerous. Quietly, patiently, by learning everything, and then becoming the thing nobody had a model for. Subscribe to Humans Hit Different for more HFY stories that remind you what humanity actually is. New drops regularly. The galaxy keeps making the same mistake, underestimating us. We keep making the most of it. Bell subscribe. We're paying attention. We always are.